So this video might get me into a little bit of trouble, but honestly, it's something I've been thinking about and feeling for a while, so I might as well just get it out there because it's something that is really worth addressing. I mean, out there in the internet universe, there's a lot of people who are scared of AI. They're singing the doom of the world due to AI, and they are very opposed to people using AI, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they are seeing how AI is going to destroy their industries and how it's leading to layoffs, et cetera. And some of that might be true, definitely. And like, definitely, there might be companies and industries that are laying people off due to AI. But I have to say, I think not all of it rests on AI and the AI industry and what AI industry portends and gives. Because, yes, my bias is that I think that AI has a lot to give to humanity, and it threatens to reorganize and disrupt the way we've done things in many industries. Many industries, in fact, that I think are broken, and that will be a bit of a focus here today. But I also think that there's a lot of benefit to be had where AI might unlock a lot of value that heretofore was not felt or was not able to be achieved because of just the limitations of what our economy is currently and will be in the future. So, all of that to say, I don't think that these people should be blaming AI for the problems in their industry. I think those problems in these industries predate AI. In fact, I highly anticipate that this video will not go anywhere. Maybe 20 people will listen to it or watch it. And the idea of it will not go very far because really the momentum is already there to blame AI as the boogeyman, as the reason for why things are getting worse. And it's going to happen. These industries already suck, but AI is a better enemy to blame. It is the supervillain. It is the Terminator. It is Skynet. It is all of the terrible. It's HAL. It's all these things that we want to blame for our problems. But in fact, all these problems predated AI. And let's just jump straight into it. And it really just begins with Lily Allen for me, honestly, because Lily Allen was, as you can see here, Lily Allen is making more money selling feet pics on OnlyFans than from Spotify. She says here, imagine being an artist and having nearly 8 million monthly listeners on Spotify, but earning more money from having 1,000 people subscribe to pictures of your feet. Don't hate the player, hate the game. And like, to me, that just underlines why things are so bad. Right? And what does it mean to be a starving artist? Because fundamentally, this idea of starving artist is old. It's been here for a very long time. And arguably for 1,000 years even, maybe 2,000, 10,000 years. I mean, look at the example of Mozart. Look at the example of Michelangelo. These were people at the top of their game at their time and died in many ways penniless, etc. And then you look into the Days era and we have this new phenomenon of superstars, and yet the starving artist continues because the majority, in my opinion, of people who are artists of all types don't make that much money. And I think that's the fundamental dilemma of this whole issue. And so, like, look at this. The top artists earning a larger share of total ticket revenue over time. This is a study from 1982 to 2003. It's probably even worse now. I mean, think about Taylor Swift making $1 billion in a tour, Beyonce the same. So this percentage is probably even worse with post-pandemic, etc. Like the ability of the internet, right? 2003 is like barely internet, right? The ability of the internet to essentially accelerate the fame of a person and accelerate one brand over other brands in its totality is something very, very powerful. I think there was a moment there during the blogosphere where everybody thought that blogs would take down media. You know, there's this hot moment there for like a few years where everybody thought that was going to happen. And then lo and behold, New York Times reasserts itself because in a world of noise, brands matter, right? And so this is true of celebrities as well. And I think this is where the work of Sherwin Rosen, this is a professor from University of Chicago. He was the head of economics at University of Chicago, which is a major economics university, who, you know, just the whole article is really great. He also has a lot of equations and mathematics that go into it, but we're just going to read the introduction a little bit as well as the conclusion, which are really insightful, right? The phenomenon of superstars, wherein relatively small numbers of people earn enormous amounts of money and dominate the activities in which they engage, seems to be increasingly important in the modern world. Now, this is before the internet, really. While some may argue that it is all an illusion of world inflation, its currency may be signaling a deeper issue. Realizing that world inflation may command the title, if not the content of this paper, quickly to this scrap heap, I have found no better term to describe the phenomenon. In certain kinds of economic activity, there is a concentration of output among a few individuals, marked skewness in the associated distributions of income, and very large rewards at the top. Really interesting, and it's worth reading through the whole thing. I highly recommend. It's publicly available. Just look for Superstars Effect Sherwin-Rosen. But let's jump to the conclusion, which is really, really, really cool and really pointed here. In discussing the general influence of economic progress on value, Alfred Marshall wrote, "The relative fall in the incomes to be earned by moderate ability is accentuated by the rise in those that are obtained by many men or women of extraordinary ability. There never was a time at which moderately good old paintings sold more cheaply than now." You could literally be talking about Spotify here. "And at which first-rate paintings sold so dearly. A businessman of average ability and average good fortune gets now a lower rate of profits than at any previous time, while the operations in which a man exceptionally favored by genius and good luck can take part are so extensive as to enable him to amass a large fortune with a rapidity hitherto unknown. The causes of this change are two. Firstly, the general growth of wealth, and secondly, the development of new facilities for communication, the internet, by which men who have once attained a commanding position are enabled to apply their constructive or speculative genius to undertakings vaster and extending over a wider area than ever before." I mean, think about people who are actors who are also investors, and they themselves become billionaires, right? "It is the first cause that enables some barristers to command very high fees for a rich client whose reputation or fortune or both are at stake, will scarcely count any price too high to secure the services of the best man or woman he can get, and is this again that enables jockeys and painters and musicians of exceptional ability to get very high prices. But so long as the number of persons who can be reached by human voice is strictly limited, it is not very likely that any singer will make an advance on the £10,000 said to have been earned in a season by Mrs. Billington, blah, 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 at the beginning of the last century, near as great as that which the business leaders of the present generation have made on the last." So, even adjusted for 1981 prices, Mrs. Billington must be a pale shadow beside Pavarotti. Imagine her income had a radio and phonographic records existed in 1801. What changes in the future will be wrought by cable, video cassettes, and home computers, not even mentioning the internet yet. So, as you can see, this is what a great framework for us to start thinking about how the last, let's say, 50 years has transpired, from Napster all the way, and from the internet to Napster, email, all the way into smartphones and social media, etc. Right? So now let's get into kind of the granularity of how much people are making in this economy, right? How much do YouTubers make? It's fun to look at how much guys like Mr. Beast earn on YouTube, but you have to keep in mind that people like him are in the top 0.00001% of earners. The truth is most YouTubers barely make a full-time income off of their platform. Reality strikes. Making a substantial income from YouTube means you'll likely need to have 1 million subscribers. According to ZipRecruiter, the average YouTuber makes around $60,000 a year, which is slightly above $100 per day. It's a lot, right? That's a lot of people that aren't making much. How much do podcasters make? Depending on factors like download numbers, podcasters can earn anywhere from $700 a month, which is not much at all, to $13,000 or even a couple of million. For instance, a podcaster with 10,000 downloads per episode may earn an average of $500 to $900 monthly. It's a lot of downloads to earn just that amount of money. So, and we'll get into like the numbers comparing the podcast industry, which is kind of interesting. And I did a little bit of research for that. Then we look at, the wages of fine artists, including painters, sculptors, and illustrators. That's a wide swath of artists. And the median annual wage is $71,000. In this case, it's also $59,000 annually. And this is of people that can make it, right? Who are making it full time. At most they're in the 90th percentile. They're 131,000, which is a much smaller percentage of people who are getting that much. So that is super interesting to think about, and just that whole range here of salaries up to 135,000, right? So I'm not trying to be totally exhaustive here, but just to give you a sense, right? So this is actors. How much do actors make? Big numbers are at 48,500 or less. That's how much Pew Research estimates households have to make to be considered low income, because the mean salaries of actors is $46,960, with over 80% making less than $26,000. The majority are considered low income. This is a staggering number, 80% below 26,000. Crazy. Artist income, this is for musicians. 66% of indie musicians earn less than 1K per year from their music. Okay, this is insanity. 45.8%. The starving artist is real. Look at that. 8.3% make 30 to 50K, which is still not a lot of money, right? This is a crazy numbers here, right? And how much income total do you expect to earn from music and related activities by end of 2022? This is kind of a similar stat here. So a very few are above $100,000. So this is a very rare number, right? And of course, kind of the Spotify numbers as well. How much does Spotify pay per stream? Spotify pays artists between 0.003 cents to 0.005 per stream on average. That works out as an approximately revenue split of 70-30. So that's 70% to the artist right holders and 30% to Spotify. So just crazy, right? Just absolutely crazy. And Spotify, frankly, is a small player in a very large market. So before we jump into this chart, as you can see, like, I'm just nailing down this argument that to be made, which is that in the arts themselves, it's already very competitive and very dire for a wide swath of artists. I don't even have to, just the culture knows it, right? Like, there's a reason why a lot of immigrant families, especially, but just families in general, kind of are encouraging their children to not be artists, because, hey, this is the economic reality. It's really hard to make it, right? It's really hard to be a comedian and then make a living being a comedian. It's hard to be a musician and then make a living being a musician full time. Like, these things are not squaring with the economic reality. And on top of it, AI definitely is disrupting what we understand to be artistry and creativity. And who knows what that leads to and what that results in, but there is that reality here, right? So all of that to say that I think that we can't be blaming AI for the struggles of creativity only, because clearly the economics of distribution, advertising, of artistry, of concert ticket sales, of streaming sales, etc., is dire from the get. It is not easy to make money in these fields. There's a reason why there are unions in Hollywood that strike every, decade or what have you, because, hey, the reality is that no one's protecting artists. The corporations are exploiting, in some ways, the artists are working with artists. And so there is that dynamic there, right? And so as a result, I chafe at the idea that people are blaming AI for their issues, because ultimately AI is not the issue. AI is definitely disrupting this already massively messed up universe of paying, let's say 80 to 90% or whatever of artists of barely living wages. So AI is disrupting that. Maybe that needs disrupting. Maybe that's my bias, of course, but maybe that does need disrupting. And maybe AI, maybe, who knows, will create a new world where distribution and people can be compensated differently. I don't know that. I think it's a long shot, but as it stands right now, it's not that much better and it's not changing. So that's really interesting. Now let's jump into some research that I did from about a year ago. And it kind of underlines to me what one of the issues is, which is that these industries are actually really small relative to other industries. So like if we look at, and this is very imperfect and it's all jumbled and you could probably barely even understand what I'm showing here, but like, let's look at global box office revenue, right? This is theater sales. So we had this 32.6 billion, 34.7, this is 2013. So we had this steady increase from 32.6 billion all the way up into 2019, $42.2 billion of theater ticket sales. That's a steady growth. And then boom, pandemic, it gets cut down to 12 billion almost, or 15 billion. Then 2021, we had a slight recovery, 22.8, still far away from that 42. Then in 2022, we've got 42.2 billion. And then 2023, we got 46.4 billion. So we're recovering back to post-pandemic levels, and there's projection to look out to the future of like still increasing up to 50 billion. But that's where things are with global box office revenue. That relative to Disney's revenue, I mean, look at that. Year on year, Disney makes more than the total global box office revenue because it has all these businesses, right? Of like Disneyland, it's got games, it's got streaming, all of that stuff. This, now look at this relative, and of course, this is all data, and you can Google this kind of stuff. Like, this is where I found it. So you can just trust me for now, but don't trust me at all. Do your own research. But like, look at this. Music industry relative to just Disney alone is tiny. It's a fraction of what Disney makes. Look at that. In 2022, Disney made 82.7. The music industry in toto made 26.2 billion. So I'm not sure if that's capturing streaming and concert sales, but you can see here that concert ticket sales for Live Nation, 8.7 in 2018, 9.43 in 2019, and then cut down to 1.7 million. Just a huge destruction there of value. And then back to 13.49 in 2022 when everybody's like, oh my God, I gotta go to concerts, right? So Spotify revenue relative to all that, like we're talking about a company earlier, right, where we're saying that they're compensating artists very low. Now look at how much Spotify makes. They only make, relative to Disney, 12.3. They make even less than the music industry in toto, of course. But I don't even know if they're included in this 26.2. They might not be. But look at that, though. It's still, nevertheless, Spotify revenue relative to Disney revenue, tiny. Relative to News Corp value, News Corp, which is a major institution which has Fox News and all of that, is only making 10.3, just a 2 billion less than Spotify. Look at New York Times, we're at 2.3 billion. Also, dude, just a fraction of what News Corp makes, and definitely a fraction of what Disney makes, which is interesting because New York Times is such a staple in popular culture that it is maybe the most premier news source in the world, despite everything. It's still one of the most premier news sources in the world, and yet makes only 2.3 billion, right? Think about that for a second there. The sports industry, on the other hand, makes 488.6 billion in 2022, dwarfing the size of everything we've just mentioned here. And oh yeah, I forgot here just to mention YouTube revenue, which has just steadily increased and is likely way higher now. 29.2 billion. That's a lot for YouTube. Just think about how that's nearing half of what Disney makes. You know, so that's crazy. And I'm sure that's a lot more now, even because YouTube has been killing it. And so super interesting. Then looking at New York Times and sports being huge. The gaming industry, look at that, huge, 267 billion, and I'm sure a lot bigger in the last few years, but 267 billion, way larger than Disney and everything we've mentioned combined aside from sports, right? And then I just wanted to compare it to the tech industry, right? So like tech, Meta made, this is revenue here, $116 billion. Okay, compared to Disney. Disney has Pixar, Star Wars, Marvel, right? It has all of the original, it has Alice in Wonderland, all of that stacks up against Meta, $116 billion. Alphabet, which has Google, 282, that's double the size of Meta, $282 billion, approaching 300, 7.3 billion, probably even higher in 2024. Insanity, right? Social media industry in general, I don't think this is a number that is worth quantifying necessarily. The ad industry is a $1.5 trillion industry, according to one projection. But digital ad spend, so this is how much money is going into digital ads, is $602 billion. That is everything here combined, essentially. Let's hear. Well, if we omitted this 1.5 here, this is nearing everything here combined. Let's see. The calculation is 1.5. Okay, maybe not everything here combined, but you see what I mean? Oh, wait, it's clocking this industry. This podcast is different, but you get the idea here that digital ad spend is absolutely ginormous and is accounting for way bigger than anything that we're talking about in terms of Disney revenue, Live Nation revenue, music, all of these where artists make money, right? Disney, Spotify, podcasting, which is like, podcasting is 1.85. It's nothing. $1.8 billion in the podcast industry is tiny, even though it's supposedly growing very fast. Now it's at 3.2 billion. It is a nothing burger next to digital ad spend, right? It's nothing next to Alphabet, next to Meta. So this to me contextually is where we are. And of course, Alphabet and Meta and Apple and all these companies are spending money in AI, and that's a whole other, burger to get into, to eat, so to speak. But like that kind of gives you a context as to like how all of these things are kind of converging, right? Where on one side, we live in a world in which the creative arts are just, people don't care, right? People don't spend that kind of money for the creative arts. You go to a bar and there's a band there and you might tip them, but all the money is going into the alcohol at the bar, right? And you go to a concert and it's one of, let's say, 1,000 concerts maybe, or 100 concerts that you go into your lifetime, and that's Taylor Swift, right? It's not some rando that you don't know about, maybe that you discovered on Spotify, unless you're like really into music in that way, right? And so there is a power curve here. There's an almost 80-20 rule. There's a superstar effect here where, as Sherman Rosen is saying here, that there is, that the people who are going to make the most money are the most famous people, and the people who are even above average are not going to make that much money. It's a really tough industry. And that's the problem of those industries to me, not necessarily the problem of AI. AI comes in to disrupt this, and it could go in multiple directions. It could make things worse. It could create a whole new crop of AI artists like myself who are, potentially even taking jobs from people who are, bona fide artists who can't adapt fast enough, or it's giving those bona fide artists more jobs. So it's unclear to me where that's all going to ride, but my main point here is that we can't blame AI for all the things that I just showed you, because those aren't the problems with AI. Those are the problems with those industries themselves. And it's the problem with us as humanity, as consumers, for how much we are willing to spend for the things that fuel our lives with creativity. So I hope that's some food for thought. Hope to hear what you guys are thinking out there, and thanks for watching.